Good morning. I hope you're all having a terrific day. Welcome to Coronarts, how COVID has impacted the arts. In this extra, we will fully reflect and discuss our reactions and thoughts to what we learned in our 3 episode series. I'm Roman.
I'm Ted.
I'm Alex.
So to start, what were everybody's first impressions coming out of those interviews?
Well, I guess the big thing I learned was that the three all had very different levels of how much they were impacted and therefore how much they had to adapt. Like Marcia, for instance, she had to make some changes. Overall, she was impacted the least because some painting is something you can do by yourself. Whereas with Mr. Bonaiuto and Mr. Malone, it they work in theater and music, so that's something you can't do by yourself, really. So they had to, in Mr. Bonaiuto's case, find ways around that and sort of make adaptations just to try and keep things as close to normal as possible. And Mr. Malone, they couldn't do anything. Like they were completely out.
Yeah, they certainly they were. I think we came across really three different, maybe two different, but I would say three different levels of difficulty in terms of their adaptation. I think that, of course, the most difficult would have to be theater. They can't rehire folks. They're having, they can't get together for their productions, and they have to socially distance. The music, at least they're able to record over Zoom. But I mean, you heard the man himself, 8 to 10 hours for 1 minute of recording. It's just I think it's crazy.
And may I add, that 8 to 10 minutes is in addition to all the rehearsals they had to do before.
Mm-hmm.
So that it's not replacing
Yeah.
the time, it's adding on to the time, like tenfold.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's I mean, I was completely shocked when I heard that. I mean, it was really something that, raised eyebrows, and I think that it's certainly something that,
Mhm.
is it's quite insane how much effort it's going to take.
Mhm.
Um, and I think when it comes to the effort level, although it's more accessible to do this, and like there's at least a way to do it, which is not the case in theater. I would say that it requires the by far the most effort to produce out of all three. If you look at that, just for a 10-minute recital to take 80 hours. I mean, it's wow. It's certainly something.
Yeah, and I would say something that really impacted me about the theater thing is like him saying, Mr. Malone saying, once you put a camera on theater, it's not theater anymore, it's television,
Right.
which
Yeah.
really goes to show how vital like the live aspect for theater is. Because with music, there's like recorded music and there's live music, there's all different kinds of stuff. But with theater, there's really only one option for you to experience it. And Mr. Malone, I'd say he's right. Like a bit of the magic is lost when you watch like a theater recording online.
No, I totally agree. It's certainly something that is especially a loss for someone so passionate about theater, and so I think clearly very uh, loves what Mr. Malone, I can tell, loves what he does, and I'm sure that there's definitely a sense of loss there um, when it retreats that sort of that third person behind the glass area, and you're not actually there, as I said, actually experiencing the moment with everybody else in the crowd with you. So, I think that certainly has had a profound effect on the theater industry across the country and the world, and many passionate theater producers like him from coast to coast.
I'd say, I mean, we're not helping with this perpetuation, but all these are sort of grouped in the same sort of category of art. And I think just the striking differences in the adaptations that these people have had to make for their art, it really shows how much of a difference is between all of them, and like how the category spans like so far and wide.
I think that's a great point. I think that leads me into I think another what I found quite interesting, which is how all three of them have sort of changed what they are producing, but in very different ways with very different intentions. For example, Marcia is now making paintings about seeking the light. That was the title of one. More about a brighter future, that moving past beyond the state. That's the theme of many of those paintings. Whereas you know, where with music, where you have a case where Mr. Bonaiuto, right, he's picking music that he knows that can be fitted into that Zoom setting of performance, right? So they're changing what they're producing for their audience, but for very different reasons. One is about theme, one is about accessibility and playability, right? So I think when you draw that comparison in terms of the differences in adaptation, I think that only expands onto the point that you were making about what they are doing with how they are creating their art in the age of coronavirus.
Mm-hmm. Ted, you got anything to say?
Sure. So I guess sort of shifting the focus a little. So I guess the big thing I noticed was that adapting to different stuff, in a lot of ways, it meant planning. Like changing different ways to plan. Like Mr. Bonaiuto came up with like many like elaborate ways to get like his performances to still happen. Marcia really focused on how to like promote her art and planning that. And Mr. Melone, it was a lot on like planning how to like continue theater once he's able to, and B, what to do in the meantime. And I guess to the same extent, I also sort of feel like none of them really had like an extreme loss of audience.
That's true, yeah.
Because Mr. Bonaiuto, like the parents of the families of the students who are part of these bands, they're still going to support them, and he's also got the backing of a college. And Marcia has either new customers she's finding over social media or old customers who like consistently buy her stuff. And I guess Mr. Melone was probably the person who I felt had the most loss of audience.
I mean, when you're in that position, you can't have an audience.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, but
100%. There's nothing you can do. I also want to just add on. I mean, you remember the Christmas card, right? Oh, well, you remember the Christmas card we got from Mr. Bonaiuto, right? I mean, that had, what, 5,000 views, the YouTube video? I mean, I think that goes beyond what you'd be filling with an auditorium of the parents of the, 40-member orchestra. So, I think that they're really expanding their base just based off of, where they're putting their music. And yeah, what you said with Marcia about, expanding on Instagram, looking for new sites. And yeah, sorry I interrupted. Go on.
No, it's fine. And so I guess as I was saying, like with Mr. Melone, I sort of feel like while theater was definitely the most impacted, I sort of feel like a lot of the reasons for why it was the most impacted, they didn't automatically boil down to like, oh, like a lot less people are supporting them. Because obviously, like with a theater group like that, if there's families who are like longtime supporters of like hit the stage company he works for, that's not going to change. So I sort of feel like with him, I noticed the loss of like with none of them really, the loss of audience ended up being like a major issue so much as like collaboration did.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think part of the reason they may have such a loyal following is because I mean, art like has a lot of impact, and art sticks with you, whether it be it physically with like a painting or something like that you might have bought from Marcia, or like with a really great musical piece or theatrical piece. Those memories stay with you, and I think the continued support of these different arts by the patrons and customers slash audience, like I think that really shows how much of an impact art can have on people. And I think that's, I mean, it's one nice thing to take away from the hellhole we're in.
A good way to put it.
I mean, in the words of Marcia, I think she mentioned once that like it was sort of therapeutic to her, and I guess like I feel like that's probably the same with a lot of other people, whatever way that may be. Like, well, looking at her paintings might elicit some strong emotions, whereas like if you're a family of one of the people who's performing in one of Mr. Bonaiuto's bands, then that would elicit like pride in your family member who is like performing that, right? So I guess that definitely sort of is a big factor. And I also sort of feel like it still functions as like an important factor for Marcia and Mr. Bonaiuto, with Mr. Malone sort of out the door because, you know, the theater isn't like they're not producing any productions. But with Marcia, I sort of feel like those emotions that her paintings might elicit, or the emotions that someone that what's it was Mr. Bonaiuto, that his performances might elicit, I feel like they're stronger now in the pandemic than they have ever been before.
I'll just say, you can chalk this up to personal experience. I'm I'm in a musical art at our school. I'm in chorale, and I can say that I mean it's a very big difference from like you've things that have been done before, because I mean Bonaiuto's stuff, similar to our stuff, is recorded um alone. Like you're recording alone, and that sort of, obviously you can't have a really big group in this time, but like, you know, the group dynamic of like orchestra or like chorus or something is like it's really you don't really notice it until it's gone, and once it's gone it's like really apparent that like that's one of the reasons we've been doing it this way for so long. It's because like it's so natural to us, and like to take that away is it's a huge difference, despite the fact that looking at the concert you may not think it is.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think a really strong point to make there. So yeah, we've talked a little bit about what we've thought about, what our impressions are, some commonalities, some differences. I want to move on to just let's talk about the finances of this, because I think that this is a very significant part of this, and I think that Mr. Malone brought it up quite frequently, his role in budgeting and how the theater's been hurt financially, and you know what it means for a community to risk losing this for economic reasons that are, of course, not the fault of any of these theaters or individuals. So, I mean, just going into them one by one, right? We have a situation where, obviously, I would say that the group in the most danger is Mr. Malone and his theater company. I think that we were able to infer from that interview that there is a very strong sense of economic insecurity. Contracts not being extended. Um, and the sort. I think that when we go to I think that Marcia's predicament is quite interesting in terms of the market for it, because it doesn't seem like much has changed financially for her, right? In terms of, I mean, she's still able to get her paintings out, and that's what her revenue source is for her. Although I do recall that she's not able to submit things to art shows or art auctions anymore because those aren't really happening anymore. So that probably does cause certainly some trouble. And then the case for Mr. Bonaiuto, um, I would think I don't recall if we asked this, but I would assume that BC bands would be backed up by Boston College financially. So he would probably have a fail safe in that case. But yeah, so what are your impressions of the whole market and the finance of the current crisis in the arts?
So I guess in terms of the financial and stuff, I guess the thing I sort of feel like is that for two of the three of them, it's entirely sort of dependent on like, you know, how many people they've got like participating. Like with Mr. Bonaiuto, he did mention he has lost a few people, but overall the band has like, it's stayed pretty much the same size. And I sort of feel like that's sort of a big factor. Although, again, due to the backing of the school, like the financially, like though more resources probably have to be invested for like audio editing and that sort of thing, I sort of feel like overall the financial aspect of Mr. Bonaiuto's work hasn't changed too much. Then with Mr. Malone, on the other hand, it's like, he can't get like the actors or directors or those kinds of people that he could in the past. So I sort of feel like that does have like a factor in impacting, how they're able to continue. And just by the nature of the cycle that his company hires artists in, I sort of feel like that cycle certainly impacts it because the artists aren't year round. So
Yeah.
like those artists especially, I feel like are probably really hurt by the pandemic. And with Marcia, since like, it's a more solo effort, I sort of feel like the whole collaboration isn't as big of a factor aside from like, of course art shows and selling her art, because for that she obviously needs more people, but she can like that can be done online.
Yeah.
Is it ideal? No, but it can be done.
Right. Yeah, of course. It's it's necessary for the survival of these of the solvency of the finance of each of these different arts that we've considered. So I think that's Alex, what would you think about what are your impressions in terms of how this is playing?
In terms of finances?
Yeah, on the finances.
On the finances, I'd say, I mean, in general, I think finance is obviously important. Money makes the world go round, all that jazz. But I I think the differences between the finances between all of them are thoroughly interesting because obviously Marcia is. I can't say she's making more, but she did state that she has a larger customer base as of now, and it's interesting to me that like art that's not affected by the pandemic is currently thriving because of the pandemic, or some of it at least is political cartoons and
Well, yeah, that's fair.
like especially those will thrive during these times.
Well, that pertains less to the pandemic and more to modern day politics. But
Yeah,
I see where you're coming from.
you can absolutely draw. I mean, they'll have more time to do it. Like,
Yeah,
there's more
100%
people
productivity.
looking
Yep.
at them because
Yeah.
there's less driving and stuff. But
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, obviously, Mr. Bonaiuto is not like a lot of. While he is a while he's a band director, he's on payroll. Like, he's currently financially fine because BU is paying him. I think more common in like the music sphere would be not like a person like Mr. Malone specifically, but like someone more in that vein of having trouble with music. Because, I mean, live music has taken a serious hit in these times because it's unfeasible right now. Like, whether that be the audience, the people on stage, any of that. So, I mean, there's a lot of like gigging musicians who would normally play at like weddings or like at social events and stuff that just can't do that right now, and their livelihood is in danger. Mr. Malone has a very loyal, like, it clearly has a very loyal, like, audience, like, who've been donating during this time, despite the fact that they are unable to put, like, what they used to out to the world. Yeah. So, but I think for a good few people, like, even that safety net isn't there. And I think I actually, like, we can draw a bit of it back to Marcia, actually, who has taken more and more to social media in these times to promote herself. Because I think for a lot of people, online stuff has become like the main way of keeping finances. We've seen with Mr. Bonaiuto, who has like uploaded stuff up to YouTube. Marcia is promoting through Instagram and Facebook, and Malone is working with social media to try to keep people interested in the product.
Yeah, you bring up a fair point there. But yeah, I think that we've all weighed in on the finances of this. I think that that's rather I think that's one of the most uh, important aspects in terms of recognizing what difficulties people are going through, um, especially in the art world, which relies on such a strong audience base, and just to know that these are stories that could probably be heard across the country with from many artists who could be struggling financially, some in even greater jeopardy with less access. I think that's a very important factor in these sorts of discussions, and in terms of factoring into a discussion of art in the age of the pandemic. So moving on, I think we can go into sort of a third area, and I'm just more. We didn't really talk all too much about this. We brought this up a little bit, a couple times, but in terms of productivity and what's next. But what is the future? What is this going to change anything once things do come back to normal? Will there be newly created industries, different habits? Um, that is something I think that is pretty interesting to consider, and I think that um, it's something that I'd like to hear. So what do you guys think that, based off what we heard today, we could see anything new developing from artists in terms of changing what they're doing in their routines in terms of the production of their arts after this pandemic has gone to pass?
Well, I guess the short answer is yes. And the long answer is like, I think with all three of them, there are certain aspects, especially like the whole online and promotion aspect, that like Mr. Bonaiuto did explicitly say like their ability to like do stuff online, like they've gotten a lot better at that. And given that they have those new skills, like I don't see why they wouldn't put them to use. I mean, obviously, like the second Mr. Bonaiuto or Mr. Malone are allowed to perform in person again, then they're going to take that opportunity because like that really is like the big thing that they've lost. And I think, but all three of them have clearly like gotten better at doing stuff online. With Marcia, it's especially due to promotion, and with Mr. Bonaiuto, it's like editing the audio and sort of like communicating online about music and stuff. And I sort of feel like since they have those skills, like they're good skills to have. And like so I think coming out of the pandemic, I don't know, part of me actually sees them ending up being more productive post pandemic because now like they can do the same exact thing they were doing before, which I think they're probably gonna like want to do as much was similar as possible. But combined with the new like technological things they've learned, I actually like I see them being a lot more productive.
So sort of like a best of both worlds. That's what you're envisioning, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think that virtual performances probably will be a thing of the past by the time we do emerge from this pandemic. I think that those are going to be a one-time thing. I don't think we're going to see a very profitable industry out of making Zoom performances. I think that once this is done, we'll go back into our live audiences, watch what we enjoy watching, and then move on from there. But I do think that, especially since the incorporation of technology has become so critical at this time, I would 100% agree with you, Ted, that it's certainly something that's going to be advanced and utilized in terms of marketing, in terms of editing and production. And I think that that's certainly going to be an advancement for I would say all three of the artists in the fields that we met and discussed in these interviews and here now.
Yeah, I'd say I'd mostly agree with Ted. I think the online aspect is going to become, like, promotion and stuff through the internet is going to become a lot more is going to stay as widespread as it has been during the pandemic after. Because why wouldn't you? There's it's mostly just benefits, and I mean, after learning it out of necessity, you'll have the ability to do it, and I mean, if you have the ability, why not? Since there's no real downside.
Yeah. And so that'll be a wrap on our podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. And we'd like to once again thank all our interviewees for agreeing to come on and make this podcast what it was. With that, this is Roman, signing off.